Hello. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Flint Anderson. If you don't know me, I'm the host of the Old Man Energy podcast, and we have a special guest with us today. I am excited about this. We have Anthony Nelson Jr., goes by Ant. What an unusual first name. I love it. Ant and Flint on the podcast together. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Flint. It's an honor to be on your show, communicate with your audience, and just tell a little bit about myself.
That's perfect. That's perfect. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. We were talking offline a little bit about as we get older, because Old Man Energy podcast, and I am a bit older than you, that our bio or our intro sheet gets kind of long, and it's just how odd it is to stand there and listen to somebody else talk and read about you. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to the listeners. What is important and what makes you unique?
Absolutely. So I am a single parent raised child. I start with that because that's really a lot of my upbringing, right? I was raised by my mom and dad, divorced at an early age. Fast forward, I joined the military, served in the Air Force for 20 years, active duty, recently retired, and now I'm living the next chapter of my life. But I'm from Newport News, Virginia, aka Bad News. I like to tell people I bring the good out of the bad, and now I'm just out trying to make an impact in every situation that I can, no matter what circles I'm in. If the people look like me, if the people don't, if they understand my background, if they don't, I know that I've learned some lessons from my faith, from football, from being in the field, being in the military, that I can share and impact leaders on every single level to make them better.
That's a powerful introduction and an incredible background. We're very similar in a lot of ways. So your message is going to resonate not only with my viewers, and I hope that my message resonates with your followers as well. We unfortunately live in a society of a fatherless generation that has been raised pretty much by a fatherless generation, and it's about to be 3 levels deep. And you can try and break that down by demographic. You can try and break that down by whatever metric you want. But when you remove a father from a household, you create a significant number of societal problems. So one thing that I heard you mention through your bio and just overall is you have a more positive outlook on this. You poked light at where you're from and some of the reputation there, but it sounds like you've got a real positive outlook. Like you don't believe that this is something that can't be altered or fixed.
Absolutely. I think when we have trials in life, right, and no matter what the age or the circumstance, it's an opportunity, right? So I try to look at it as an opportunity. I have always looked at it as an opportunity, even as a child. I didn't have verbiage for it. I didn't have a name, but I would, poke fun at a situation that was maybe difficult or laugh, not necessarily be the class clown, even though I was for a couple of years. I would try to find something that I could hold on to that would be like the light at the end of the tunnel, for whatever situation I was in.
That's important. What you're describing, it for lack of anything else, is just hope. And there's a lot of young men out there that don't really see that or don't have a lot of that in their life. I know for me personally, growing up, my father didn't come back into the picture until I was into my late teens, but it was a feeling of helplessness, of knowing that there was a better way, especially being in a single mom household. I don't know how. Sounds like you grew up struggling a little bit, but I mean, we struggled when we were little. Sometimes there wasn't enough food. So we were paying the consequences for somebody else's either bad decisions or just lack of options. And you reconciled that as a child and have been able to direct that into your adulthood and into helping others. Is that correct?
That is correct. Absolutely. I kind of found football and other sports as like a place where you can get to know other people. Right. One thing that I understood as a kid, it didn't really matter what was going on at school or at home. When we all put those pads on, It's like one team, one fight, right? Like we were just out there trying to accomplish a goal, and we became like, a brotherhood out there. And I found that in various sports, but football was my first one. I played baseball and basketball and a couple other ones. But I really found that community. And, I live my life by three principles: community, connection, and compassion, right? I feel like there is always going to be a need for community. Everybody wants to be part of something bigger than themselves, right? And you always want to have a connection to something that's bigger than yourself. And you want to know that whatever you're working toward or you're a part of is bigger than yourself. You want to make an impact, right? So having that community and connection, it all falls under one category, and it's compassion. And I believe that everyone has compassion, right? Sometimes, if we're in those situations that you mentioned, like how I grew up and how you grew up, sometimes our compassion for something can display itself in less than good, environments and less than good situations because we're passionate. We just don't know how to communicate it. So I live my life by that model: community, connection, compassion. And I see that modeled mostly through the life of Jesus.
So that community connection played a huge part in your development into the man that you are today, but also your faith plays a huge part in that as well. So can
Absolutely.
you explain how those 2 came about? Did you come to the faith afterwards? Were you raised in the church, or how did that impact you as a child, and how does it impact you today?
Well, yeah. So I when I was younger, I never did drugs, but I did have a drug problem. My mom drugged me to church, right? My mom drugged me to
Doors are
church,
open, we're there.
right? So I like to think that I had it, in me a little bit. And then when I joined the military and got on my own and try to live life, far from mom and dad, I realized the core of my faith, and I began to walk it out for myself and see, number one, what they were talking about back in the day. It was real, what they were, mentoring me about and guiding me and shepherding me. It was real. It was right. Now, once I grabbed hold of that, man, my eyes just really, really became open because I realized I was searching for something. And what was I searching for? I was searching for identity, right? Even as a child, I could not have fully explained it, right? But when you don't really have that male figure in your life, sometimes you're, like you mentioned, you're missing something. But I was so blessed to always have a positive male role model in my life, whether it was an uncle, whether it was my older brother, or just, men in the church or coaches, mentors, teachers. I always had someone that I could look up to. I had a good friend named JT. He's a year older than me. And after high school, he joined the military. He joined the Army. And then a year later, after I graduated, I joined because he had such an impact on me from just playing football, playing basketball, or just being in the neighborhood, hanging out with him and his family. There was always an impact. So I always saw positive, even in the midst of a negative situation.
How how would you encourage young people, and then let's transition into what you're doing today. How would you encourage young people that are in a desperate situation? Because I mean, honestly, you and I both know that growing up in today's society is much more challenging and much more public than anything we went through.
Yeah,
So how do you go about encouraging these young people to maintain that positive outlook and that positive growth when there's such an echo chamber of social media reinforcing the negative?
right. So I think it's a couple of things. One, there's a terminology that most kids use now. It's called op, right? Op means opposition. So I try to challenge them to say, hey, don't worry about your ops, worry about your ops. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's the same thing. No, don't worry about your opposition, worry about your opportunities, right? What's in front of you? What can you control, right? So I often try to encourage him to reflect on the hard times, reflect on the tough times, the times you were in the trenches, right? And what were those lessons? What did they teach you? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about others? Because I share this with my kids all the time, and I share with your audience. There's 3 L's. I feel like there's 3 L's that you need in life. You always need to take one, if not all, of these L's with you, and you will get out of almost every situation in life. And that is, one, be a listener. You don't know it all. Even what you know, you only know a portion of it, right? So listen and then learn. Acquire the information, acquire the knowledge, be around people, try to, find the outlook to learn. So listen, learn, and then you got to lead. So many times young people want to lead others. No, start with you. You want to see change? Lead yourself. Push past your comfort zone, push past, that friction of, well, man, it's a little difficult for me. It's a bit of a challenge. I share with my kids and then kids that I've coached and refereed all the time. There's a difference between hard and impossible. We can do hard things, and it's good for us to do hard things, right? So if we're doing hard things, it makes our situation appear to be just a little more easy. And if it's a little more easy, then we can take that extra step, and we don't have to give up when the, going gets tough, as they say.
It sounds like, based on your description, one, you've got some experience with this. And number two, that leadership to you is almost interchangeable with discipline. Am I understanding what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's misunderstood is everyone wants to be a leader and abandon being a follower. In order to be a good leader, you got to be a good follower. In order to be a good follower, you got to have discipline, right? You got to have self-discipline, because guess what? Sometimes you could be right as a follower and you still need to shut up. You still need to lead, right? You still need to know how to communicate. You still need to know how to accomplish a mission or task. And I think some of that comes from, my military background. Sometimes you might have the answer, but just because you have the answer doesn't mean that you know how to deliver it. Doesn't mean that you're ready to deliver it. Doesn't mean that it needs to come from you. So being a leader being a follower sometimes allows you to be in the back seat and see, from the back seat, an opportunity to grow. How would I communicate in this situation? Is the other person listening? Are they receiving the information?
One of my favorite quotes is, the greatest detriment to communication is the illusion that it happened.
Yes. True indeed.
So
True indeed.
how do you help these young men? And I'm not isolating specifically or on men or young women or young people, but in general, how do you help them? What advice would you give to them if you had a couple of minutes just to talk to them
Mm. Yeah.
about making these hard choices? Because realistically, I mean, let's call it what it is. We're talking about them turning their back on the lifestyle of instant gratification and ease and drug use and promiscuity, and living a life of discipline and being a leader for their. That's not easy to do as an adult. So what's your best advice for young people listening to this podcast that are feeling like that's what they need to do? What are you going to encourage them to do?
I would encourage them to think twice as hard about their consequences than they do their decisions. A lot of times we only focus on the decision. I feel like this, I feel like that, so I'm going to go with my feeling. Nah, don't even worry about that. That's going to happen. Those thoughts are going to come across your mind. Think twice as hard and twice as long about the consequence of your decision. Now, if you're man enough, you're woman enough to deal with that consequence, then, you got to deal with the consequence. But our thoughts are important. And the second part I would say to that is, to a young person, to let them know that you hold the keys to your mind. Here's what I mean. Your thoughts are like guests coming into your home. Just because they ring the doorbell doesn't mean you got to open it up, right? Just because a decision has been made by other people doesn't mean that you need to allow their influence to open up the door and now you receive and you take on these thoughts. You hold the keys. You can look at that Ring doorbell app and say, nah, you're not welcome. I didn't order the Amazon thought, right? I didn't order that. So I don't need to receive that. You can. Like, it's okay not to address something. So I would encourage them with that. Your thoughts, right? And then understanding that you have to follow. Following is not a bad thing, it's not a bad trait. We need more followers because one day those followers will turn into leaders.
Very true. Very true. You cannot, and to expand a little bit more on the followers and leaders part, my wife and I were discussing this earlier, is you cannot alter a system you're in without understanding it. The best way to learn anything new is an apprenticeship or just to follow somebody that knows what they're doing. The thing is, in today's world, you can use that supercomputer that sits in your pocket
Hmm.
to look up pictures of cats,
Yeah.
or you can use it to look up things that are positive. You can be plugged in and connected to people, even if you don't like when you and I grew up, we had to go out and we had to look for people to follow the old fashioned way. You mentioned coaches and what
Yeah.
have you because of athletics. I was athletically declined. I was the quintessential band nerd in school and was pretty much surrounded by women. So when I started seeking mentors out, not only was it intimidating going and talking to guys, but it wasn't like I could hop on YouTube and listen to Jordan Peterson or Andy Frisella or any one of the mentors and guys that put content out there. You can literally get into these guys' head, even if you don't like reading, which I encourage everybody to read. But
Yeah.
you can follow and learn what you need to learn in no matter what environment you come from. To jump around a little bit, can you give us some of your background, Ant, on what your environment was like as a child to give the listeners something to compare to?
Yeah, absolutely. uh, I grew up in Georgia um, when my parents were married, and my father's from Georgia, small city, or not even city, a town. Right? So I grew up in what you and I would know of as like that old South, right? Slow pace, country roads, sun tea on the porch. Like, I loved it. I loved everything about it, right? Then we moved to Virginia. And now my mom, she was from Virginia, but she was raised in the country as well. So I had the best of both worlds. And then, later they got a divorce, and it was myself, my younger sister. And, we faced some difficult times, just to be honest. The stereotypical African American household, right, with one parent. And that was difficult because we perpetuated a cycle, right? My father's parents were divorced. My mother, I believe her father was divorced as well. So we saw a lot of highs and we saw a lot of lows. But in that, my mother comes from a large family. So we would spend time driving across the water, as we would say, to go to the country so I could spend time with my cousins. And I love my family, man. They're just so amazing. So a lot of times we would go over there to kind of escape, the difficulties of life and just hang out with them, on the weekend or summers and things like that.
Got a lot of fond memories of summers at my grandma's
Yeah.
house for that exact reason. Now, back then, that was just what I thought you did as a kid. Now I look back, it's
Yeah.
like, wow, mom couldn't afford a babysitter because we weren't in
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little more sobering and humbling looking at it through the eyes of an adult than it was as a kid.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
What
And
what do you do? Do you have children now, Aunt?
I do.
How
Yes.
how many children do you have now?
Yeah. So I have four beautiful kids now.
Do you still keep them plugged into that good old Southern roots country lifestyle, or how do you do that for your children to give them that feeling?
Yeah, I try to, man. Like you mentioned, technology is moving so fast. So I think it's a constant battle of trying to be aware and engage, but at the same time place those boundaries. The way I like to look at it is, when you're driving on the side of a mountain, right? They have guardrails for a reason, right? they,
Yeah,
oh, I just want to drive fast, buddy. Don't get upset that the guardrail is there. Be like, oh, remove everything. Kids can do whatever. Let's ask the question: why are the guardrails there? So I try to instill guardrails, as it relates to technology and just the nuances of parenting. It can be difficult. I would just say more of a challenge now. I try to give them a little taste and flavor of how I grew up while also incorporating and understanding that they are in the technology age. So a lot of times I have to put my foot in my mouth and be like, nope, that's their age, that's their demographic, that's where they're at. They know how to text. So I have to balance it. Um, and sometimes I'm 51%, sometimes I'm 49.
It can be used for good or evil.
Yeah.
The internet is the longest running experiment in anarchy in human history.
Mm.
And it shows. And I mean, there's different, we develop different problems from it. But then on the other hand, one of my granddaughters is 6, and we came in and were listening the other day. She was talking to our Google Home device. She's learning Spanish through the Google Home device. She's having it teach her Spanish just
Wow.
because she was curious and was asking the Google Home questions and how to translate this and how do you say that. And turns out there's a function in there that will teach you Spanish. So at 6, she's teaching
Yeah.
herself Spanish through that. Now, she also likes to go and watch stuff she's not supposed to from time to time. Nothing terrible, but it's just finding that balance between what your children are willing to do and not willing to do, and what we should do as parents and what we should restrict them from. Because we want our children to be prepared, whether it's our kids, whether it's children we're mentoring, whatever. We want them to be prepared to be existing as a functional member of society. But we also want to keep them safe and protected. And we have these dangers that are just introduced directly into our children's bedrooms, into their beds. They're laying there scrolling their phone before they go to sleep at night unless we put some kind of restriction on it. I don't know
Right.
about you. My kids are all grown now, but they were always better at figuring out ways around the restrictions we put on there than I ever was at putting them on there. It was that sometimes it seemed kind of pointless because like they had it figured out before we actually implemented.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's like on one side of the coin, you're upset, right? Because you're a parent and you're like, I've given the instruction, I've explained the, expectation, and you're not meeting them. I'm a little disappointed, but I'm a little curious because you found a way around it. It's like, man, do I need to communicate better, or do we have a super genius on our hands?
And I'm going to encourage the listeners to take this conversation to heart, especially if you're a parent. And if you're a parent of a child who has not come of age yet, you have to prepare for this because it's not going to get any easier. My advice and encouragement is do not lock your children in a box. Prepare them to deal with the monsters, because then they can come to you for help if they know how to deal with the monsters. But if all they know is rejection and punishment because they're doing what they're not supposed to do, the last thing they're going to do when they actually get into real trouble and are confronted by a monster, and it's not if, folks, it's when that happens, is come to you for help. And you don't want to encourage them not to do that. You want them to come to you for help no matter what. I think I got that original intent from Gary Vee years ago, talking about
Mm.
prepare your children, but it's gotten more relevant the longer time goes on. And it's just teach your children not to live in fear. And it would have been easy, based on what you told us about your upbringing, for you to live in fear, constant fear, fear of
Oh, yeah.
anything. I mean, everything. When you don't have anything, when you're growing up poor or underprivileged or disenfranchised, you don't really have a lot of hope. It's real easy to live scared all the time. You
Yeah, man, absolutely. I think, well, I know for sure my mom, matriarch of the family, man, she brought everyone together, when she was alive, and she was the life of the party, and she always found the good in every situation. And I truly believe that that has rubbed off on me and how I choose to see everything, right? Because oftentimes people get it confused and they think because you bring light to what is absent or what's not working, they think that you don't see the good. And that's not true. It's the good is there. We can acknowledge it, but we do have some areas to work on. And that was one thing that my mom did, like, in every situation. whether it was school, whether it was finances, whether it was transportation, getting us from one sport to another school and back and forth. She always dealt with the reality, but she had hope. And I think one, because of her faith, she had hope. Two, she knew that if I stay in this negative talk and this negative mindset, nothing good can come from it because I'm planting these negative seeds, then I'm going to get a tree that's going to produce negative fruit, right? So she taught us, she didn't have the language or the lingo or vernacular for it, but she was teaching us by demonstration, hey, if you plant good and if you hope and if you begin to look for the thing that you're looking for, even though it's not here right now, you can move out of your situation and move further from your situation to a better place. But you got to start with the mind. You got to start with the mind and start to visualize and start to hope and start to prepare for and expect it to happen. Expect those things that you're believing for to happen.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. That is taking faith and turning it into true manifestation. That sounds made up. If I'm a cynical 15, 16-year-old kid who's had a hard time, and you're
Yeah.
sitting here talking to me about faith and about, okay, well, if I go plant some seeds of good over here, this is going to happen. And expand on that. Explain what that means in a practical standpoint. Explain what that means to like a teenager in today's society, how they can create that and make their life better.
Yeah, so I would tell it to a teenager like this. When you have clarity of purpose, when you know your why, you can outlast any obstacle, right? So a lot of times they're facing negative obstacles and they're like, they don't have clarity. So because they don't have clarity on the purpose of a thing, you will misuse or what we call abuse a thing, right? So I can take a hammer and I can go smash an egg, or I can take a hammer and use that same hammer to put a nail in the wall. I have to understand the purpose of a thing. So because a child may not understand the purpose of their situation, the purpose of, going to school, or the purpose that they're, in this situation, it can, of course, be daunting and a negative task. But I would just challenge them to get some clarity on their purpose. What's the purpose of this situation? What can I control? I can't control what others do. I can't control how they feel. I can't control, maybe living in this part of town. I can't control that. But what can I control? I can control this, my mind. I can control what I see, what I listen to, what I allow to come into my home, right? If our mind is our home, I can control the door that I open and what thoughts I allow to come in and take room and take residence in my home. I can control that. And I think once they understand that that is probably more powerful than the things that they're looking at, man, it's a game changer.
That's a very good explanation. And folks, especially young people out there, you need, I don't know, maybe there's some old folks like us that need to hear this too.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the traditional religion faith to have faith and believe that things happen. Now it helps, but every time that you pause a movie or prepare breakfast before you go to bed, you're having faith that you're going to wake up and be able to take advantage of that. Every time that you step outside and get into your car and go somewhere, you have faith that that's not going to break down and get you where you need to go. So applying that to things that we want, not just things that exist around us already, is not that big of a leap. Although we've turned it into this huge thing of, oh my goodness, well, here we go again. I remember when I was younger and going to mentors, I would ask them to help me, and every single one of them, the more successful they were, the more they harped on this, was you got to have dreams, you got to turn them into goals, and you got to take action every day. And I used to get so pissed off at them. I was like, look, I want the good stuff, man. I
Yeah.
wanna be rich. You're just sitting here talking to me about dreams and goals. We don't talk about that. We talk about how much paycheck we're gonna get or this or that. And over time, you become to realize that that is what matters because that's what changes your life. The more you think about something, the more you take daily action to create it. That's all faith in a
Mhm.
practical application standpoint is. And if your
Absolutely.
faith guides you, and takes you on that path. And it doesn't matter how old you are. You could do that at 5, you could do that at 15, you could do that at 70. It doesn't matter. So you've talked a little bit about, you've talked a lot about these different things, but you said that you were in the military, you grew up. What are you doing? What are you doing now? What are you doing now to implement all of these things? Will you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a leadership company called Cultivate Network Leadership, right? So what I'm doing, I'm taking leadership lessons learned from the military, from my upbringing, and from my love of sports, playing, coaching, refereeing, and applying that to the business sector, right? So a lot of times, business owners want to focus on their bottom line, rightfully so. But if you overlook the people, then you won't have a bottom line. So I try to, well, let me put it like this, sir. We strive at Cultivate Network Leadership to provide leaders with tools and managers with tools so that they can improve their followership and also grow professionally and personally.
Explain what followership means.
So, I kind of hinted at it earlier. Being a follower means I'm willing to submit to authority. And while those words may seem a little aggressive or a little Gen X, if you will, everyone submits to authority in some form or fashion. So, as a follower, I need to not only acquire information and knowledge, I need to observe. And I think that we often negate the importance of observation. And when you realize that you're a follower, you can observe and learn probably more ins and outs than just picking up a book or reading an article online or asking Chat GPT to give you, an answer. You can understand what I consider the gray matter. When you look at a book as a white sheet of paper with black text, you can just read the information. But it's really not about the white and black. It's about the gray matter. And that's where humans live. They live in the gray matter. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's that in between. That in between is that gray matter, having emotional intelligence, knowing yourself and knowing how you respond and react to certain things by also knowing how other people respond in situations.
Chris Voss, the FBI negotiator, calls that tactical empathy. Sitting back and listening with a purpose. Now, that purpose could be a negotiation in his part, but in your part, it's just to learn the system. And what you're referring to is learn the system and learn to be a better follower. And I hope that the way he's talking is getting under your skin a little bit to those listeners out there. That means you need to hear it. And none of us, I mean, it irritates me to hear you got to learn to submit to authority. Well, we all have to submit to authority, whether we like it or not. And my wife's in the background making faces and pointing at me like, yes, yes. So, and it seems to be a badge of honor. I have a problem with authority. That's so what? Every 15-year-old, you are not unique. Every 15-year-old has a problem with authority. Now, whether you take something and define your life out of it, I had a problem with authority, so I decided that I needed to work for myself and be an entrepreneur. What does that mean? It means I've worked 2 or 3 times as hard over the last 20 years as I would have if I'd had a job working for somebody else. But I got to do what I wanted. But it's important. You can't be a leader if you don't know how to follow. I think the biblical term is servant leadership. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a very powerful concept when it's implemented correctly. And there can be no manipulation with that. And I'm going to recommend a book to you, Ant. I'll send you the link to it. It's a buddy of mine. I met him here in North Florida. His name is Jason Daughtry. He wrote a book called Be a Boxer, Not a Fencer. And it's a book about how to improve yourself by a philosophical military guy. And this guy he looks the military part. And when you read, it's some of it, a lot of what he talks about in there, his philosophies are very similar to ours. And I'm going to encourage our readers to get it as well. I'm going to put the link to that book in the notes for this show. But he talks about improving yourself. The difference between a boxer and a fencer is a boxer is the weapon. You
Mm.
train yourself with discipline and you submit and you learn all of the different styles in how to be a better fighter, and you train your body as the weapon. Whereas a fencer, no less dangerous, but they're trained to use other things as weapons instead of themselves. And ultimately, we are in a struggle every day. I mean, we led the opening of this podcast with the struggle of growing up, with the struggle of growing up in underprivileged circumstances. And again, whatever demographic, we grew up similar backgrounds, but you grew up in a single mother African American household. I grew up in the middle of the oil field in a single mother, just poor household. Doesn't make one better than the other, just means we all have our struggles. We all had to fight to get what we need to get. Whether we choose to internalize that fight or whether we choose to resent other people because we're having to fight, well, that's not anybody else's responsibility. That's up to us. So let's explore that for a minute. And
Okay.
because I really am curious on your views on that. In working with young men and working with young leaders, that's one thing that you and I have to overcome is just that massive level of resentment. Like they think their life is harder today because of, I don't know, insert any number of reasons. I'm sure you've heard thousands of them at this point. What do you do to help overcome that, especially given the fact that men really aren't challenged that much in school or in society anymore?
Yeah, I try to relate to them, right? Like, I try to help them understand while your situation may be real, you're not the first person ever in the world to go through what you're going through, right? Like, you're not. Like, I get it. Okay, dad's not at home, or mom might not be at home, or you're failing in school, or, you have a tough situation. You're not the first one. So we can learn from others. I remember growing up, people used to always say, learn from your mistakes, learn from your mistakes. I used to hear that all the time. It wasn't until I got older and had some solid mentors that would say, yes, learn from your mistakes, but let me give you one better. Learn from other people's mistakes, right? Let me read about them being in my situation, and their highs and lows so I can avoid that obstacle. Let me get some tools and resources, and I'm come from the athlete's perspective. Let me get their playbook so I can see, okay, I got a couple plays I can run here, right? So a lot of times it's helping them to understand you're not in it alone. Like, you do have an advocate, you do have someone with you. And when you know that you have someone there with you, what I've found out is the burden becomes less. And those kids have so much. They're carrying so much. And a lot of times they're not communicating it. So they feel overwhelmed. But if you can just come alongside them and let them know, I'm here with you, I'm here to help you carry this burden, man, they will go to the moon and back for you.
We need to make sure that we convince them they're unique, just like everybody else. And that, while I say that tongue in cheek, it's true. We all fall down in this well of isolation. Like we're the only ones that have ever gone through this problem before. And those of you younger listeners that are listening to this is not unique to being a teenager or being a young adult. It still happens at our age. And
Absolutely.
as guys get older, our friendships tend to wane and we don't have as many men around us to bounce ideas off of. So we become even more isolated. That's a whole different topic for a whole nother time. But remember to reach out to those people that care about you and watch who you're taking that advice and direction from. Make sure that they're living the life that you want to be living. You wouldn't take wealth advice from somebody who was homeless or who was poor in the same manner that you wouldn't take health advice from somebody who was grossly obese. Don't take mental advice from somebody who's not living the life that you want to live. Seek out quality men of honor and integrity to guide you and mentor you. Have the balls to reach out and ask them. They will make time, especially because they know how hard it is and how much guts it takes just to step up and ask the damn question. So
Absolutely.
I know any time that somebody's asked me for help with that, There's one exception. Somebody I've said yes every time. If a young man's asking me for help because I knew what guts it took. I'd say no one time, and there were certain circumstances around that it wasn't actually a real request. But we've been harping on these topics and talking about this for almost 45 minutes, which is amazing. It feels like we just started talking. So,
Yeah.
in the essence of keeping people's attention and allowing you to get back to your lives, what powerful, and you can make this as aggressive as you want to, because I want to leave an impact with the people on here. What powerful message do you want to leave the listeners with?
Mm. Ooh, man, that's a good one, man. I have so many right now. Wow. I would say, mm, man, you stumped me on that one. Hold on, give me a second. Okay, all right, I'm ready. What I would leave with the listeners is this: back isn't an attack; it's a gift. Embrace it, right? Even when it's hard to hear, it's difficult to receive. Let it sharpen you, because the more you allow it to sharpen you, the better you will become. Iron sharpens iron, so another man sharpens another man. And the reality is, we're in a battle, and we cannot win this battle with dull weaponry. We need sharp weaponry.
Oh, that was great. That was awesome. That in and of itself needs to be a clip and will be independently. Guys, young people, old people, whatever you want to call yourselves, it doesn't matter. Listen, society is not going to get any better if we all sit around and wait. Take his advice now and start pushing yourself. Start doing the hard things. Get your ego out of the way and allow yourself to learn, because mistakes are not failure. Quitting is failure. Mistakes are an opportunity to learn. But the only way that you learn is you stand back up, you listen to people that have gone ahead of you. Like he said, feedback is not a bad thing. You take that to heart and you actually implement change. I used this example the other day, and I'm going to close out and leave you guys with this, in that we can study and we can learn as much as possible, but if we never actually take action and implement anything and do things badly until we get good at them, then nothing's ever going to change. It would be equivalent to a builder that keeps delivering supplies to a job site but never actually builds a house. Well, he knows every piece of that house exists and he's delivering, but he never did anything about it. You have to get out there and you have to engage. So if you're a young person and you have somebody that you look up to and you want to learn to be more like them, go ask them. And folks our age, if you have a young person in your life, one, if they have the guts to step up and ask you questions and ask you for help and guidance and mentorship, honestly take time out of your day to give them some, because it took a lot of guts for them to ask that. And number two, if you have somebody who's in your life that's looking for that leadership, then reach out to them and ask them if you can start working with them. Because sometimes they need that leadership and they just don't have it. They don't even know how to ask about it. Maybe they don't listen to this podcast or what have you. If you guys want to engage with either Ant or myself, our information is going to be in the description below. Make sure that you like and subscribe and you get that notification bell so that you get all of the updates, including the shorts from this. There's going to be more to come between Ant and myself and a couple of other folks. We're working on a project for next year that you're going to want to keep an eye on and get more information on, because you can be able to interact with us directly inside and outside of our normal work environment. So, guys, until next time, we love each and every one of you. Keep growing and come back and hear us next week. Love y'all. Peace.